Hi and welcome to Coffee with Craig, in which we look at events that are happening in the world with spiritual eyes, and particularly through the eyes of someone like myself who is a psychic medium. And we think about the spiritual meaning of some of the things that go on in the world. And today I'm going to talk about the goings on that are happening at the bottom of the Atlantic at the moment around the Titanic, with some thoughts about the Titanic, its energy, and whether perhaps the Titanic itself could have been cursed. So welcome to Coffee with Craig. Well, hi and welcome to the show. And first, I would like us to send a positive thought to those that are stuck in the Atlantic at the moment, in the submersible that is viewing the shipwreck of the Titanic at the moment. And I'm not going to make any predictions about this of any sort, because these people's lives are hanging in the balance, and that would not be right to do that. But where there's life, there's hope. And at the time of doing this video, they're still alive, and let us pray that they survive and that their families may find some solace somehow. But anyway, I want to talk today around this topic a little bit more generally, actually, in particular about the curse of the Titanic. Now, my family hail from Southampton. In fact, we've been able to track our family roots right the way back to the 16th century, in which we were ferrymen in Southampton. In fact, my surname Parker, I call myself Hamilton Parker, but my actual main surname is Parker. Parker means a parker of the boats, and we go right the way back. And so we're very connected with the stories and mysteries of the sea, and with the Titanic. In my family tree, we've got a captain of the Kaiser's yacht. One of my great granddads was the captain of the Kaiser's yacht. We were involved with the Clippers. We were involved with a number of sinkings. My granddad himself was rescued from the sea when the Rohilla, a boat, the hospital boat in the First World War, went down off the coast of Whitby, which is another famous story. And of course, there's a story that you might read on the website about the associations with our family with the Mignonette, another boat that Edgar Allan Poe had strange forebodings about years before it happened, and the crew were eaten, including my grandfather's cousin rather, Richard Parker, who died on that boat and was eaten by his shipmates. But there are other stories. But the Titanic is also featured very much in our family as well, certainly on my grandmother's side. And I'll mention a little bit about that briefly as we go along. But I want to consider today some of the strange things that are associated with the Titanic. There's an awful lot of myth, I suppose, and crazy early conspiracy tales associated with the Titanic. It was one of those stories that really captured the public imagination then, and even captures it to this day. You know, if that submersible had gone down anywhere other than by the Titanic, would it still have the same press interest? Because for some reason we're very fascinated by the energy of the Titanic. I think perhaps we can kind of associate with it. Any of us could go on a cruise and be trapped in those situations, so we can relate with the people on board. And maybe there's a sort of a curse to the boat. Maybe there's some eerie coincidences. It's an ill-fated vessel, and it makes me wonder whether it carries a sort of a deeper meaning, perhaps even a curse on the rich and privileged. Anyway, one of the most fascinating things, I think, with the story of the Titanic is, just like in the story of Edgar Allan Poe, which you can go and find out on my site as well, in which Edgar Allan Poe predicted the fate of my family, there was another novel written about a boat called the Wreck of the Titan. And this book was called Futility, the Wreck of the Titan. Now, the submersible is actually called the Titan and it's described on the website as Titan is a Cyclops class manned submersible designed to take 5 people to the depths to 4,000 meters. I think it's one of the, I'm not quite sure 100% got this right, but I'm interested that was the curse of Odysseus, wasn't it? Was associated with the Cyclops, and to actually be calling these boats a Cyclops class worries me a little bit, because there was the curse of Polyphemus or something. I can't remember the quite name of it, but there was the Odysseus was cursed, and it was due to the Cyclops' intervention. So is even the submersible part of this idea of a boat being cursed? But the word Titan, not Titanic, was the name of the Wreck of the Titan, which was a book published in 1898. 14 years before the Titanic sank, by a man called Morgan Robertson, I think his name was. I'm not sure if I got that quite right, but he called the book Futility. And in this story, so many of the things that actually really did happen in real life on the Titanic were written about in his book. So many similarities. Both ships were described as unsinkable, and of course the Titanic ended up sinking. They both had insufficient lifeboats. That was the key to it. And they both collided with an iceberg in the North Atlantic. So did the man see this? Did the author see the Titanic sinking before it did? You know, there were many premonitions about the Titanic like this. You know, there was all sorts of strange things also associated with it. I mean, it was, like I said, one of the first conspiracy theories. Many people believed at the time that this was a big plan to get rid of political and business rivals by putting them all on the Titanic and sinking it. And actually, it wasn't the Titanic that sank, but it was their sister ship, the Olympus, that had gone down. And that was one of the stories at the time. You know, a bit like our moon landing theories, isn't it? There was no moon landing. You know, there was no Titanic sinking. It was the Olympus, and a lot of people still sort of hang on to this theory to this day. I mean, there's a lot to disprove that, but I won't go into all the details of that. But there was this idea of the swapping of the ship. But there was also another story that I found interesting. Now, I'm not sure the name, but I think there was a mummy, an Egyptian mummy. I think it was called Amek-Ra, which was a princess of the Egyptians that was mummified and being carried on the Titanic, allegedly. And this artifact is supposed to have been cursed. And many people, particularly at the time, there was lots of stories at the time of, was the Titanic sank by the mummy's curse? You know, it came to its tragic fate, or was this purely fictional story? There's still debate to this day about whether there really was a mummy carried on the Titanic. But it's an interesting sub-story in many ways, and I think really sort of builds on this idea that so many people think and still think, thought and still think, that the Titanic had a sort of a special curse to it, you know, because, you know, it was such a tragic story. In fact, many people cancelled their tickets before they went on the Titanic. Some very notable individuals were also stopped their tickets, like J.J. Morgan, who was a huge American financier at the time. And I think he was the owner of the White Star Line. I'm not sure, but he cancelled his tickets. This is where another one of the theories comes in. And did he put all his rivals on the ship and let it go down deliberately so that he could get rid of his rivals? You know, J.P. Morgan. I mean, that was a conspiracy theory at the time. There was another guy called, I think his name was Milton Hershey, Hershey bars. He still see the Hershey bars. He also cancelled his tickets just before he went on the Titanic. So a person who had a premonition of some sort, perhaps. But there's lots and lots of these premonitions. I remember the whole load of them have been listed in Colin Wilson's books, who was a fabulous writer. If you ever need to read somebody about the paranormal, he's died now, but brilliant writer, Colin Wilson, who looked at a lot of the strange coincidences with the Titanic and did a great deal of research into it. So lots of people had these coincidences. Lots of people had strange dreams. One or two famous other authors had strange dreams and cancelled their trips. I can't remember which one it was now, but you can find it in the Colin Wilson books. And it was remarkable, really. I mean, the people of Southampton definitely felt that it was cursed. My grandmother, she was 6 years old when the Titanic went down. And she said to me that the people of Southampton always did feel that the Titanic was cursed somehow. She said, because most of the crew had come from both Belfast and Southampton. And where she lived in the streets of Chapel, which was the poor area of Southampton. And most of the crew had come from there. And she said the whole street was lined with black flags, she remembers. And she tells me that when she was a little girl, 6 years old, she remembers people dropping down in the street and crying and in despair when they saw the headlines of the newspaper men carrying the banners saying, you know, selling the newspapers with Titanic sinks written on it. And she said it was a terrible feeling in the city at the time. In fact, one of her, after the event, one of the survivors of the Titanic actually took lodgings in the same house that my nan and her mum were living at the time, granddad were living at the time. And he hung himself in the back room because he was so, he felt so guilty that he survived and others didn't. And the man went into a deep depression. Of course, there was no psychological help for people with trauma in those days. And he took his own life. So there's always been this feeling that the ship has been cursed, you know, that something was wrong with the energy of the Titanic. There was other stories too. I mean, these go back into the early conspiracy feelings about the Titanic, and that they had a coal fire on the Titanic just before it launched, and they say that weakened the ship, you know, and that they sent the ship out even knowing that it might sink. There was another weird coincidence or story of a coincidence that kind of goes back to the shipyards in Belfast too, at Harlem and Wolff, where it was built. And it had a number, they say, on the side of the boat, because the White Star Line had a kind of a practice that you know, sailors are very superstitious people, and they think you should have a proper christened name to a boat. And Harland and Wolff had this thing of not actually naming a ship until the last minute, and they would give it a number, and the number apparently was 390904, which seems benign enough to us until you mirror it, and it appears to look like the words "No Pope." Now, of course, Northern Ireland, there's a major conflicts all the way through its history between Catholics and Protestants. And "No Pope" was actually a slogan that was being used at the time for anti-Catholicism. So, you know, was this another sort of some strange coincidence? Was it cursed because it had offended God or offended the Catholics, you know? So there's all these other interesting sort of energies that go with the Titanic, you know? I mean, it's pretty hard to sort of qualify whether there was a mummy on board, for example, but all of these kind of come together to become a sort of an energy, even of our thoughts that we project to it, create a sort of a negativity, a negative energy. I mean, the Titanic film, that was another one. That was filmed in 1997, the movie Titanic, directed by James Cameron. You'll remember, brilliant movie. They also, actually, incidentally, they had a story on there about the like a diamond, the cursed diamond on the being carried on the ship, and that's apparently a you know, another one that was a false story, a bit like the curse of the Hope Diamond. It was a curse of a diamond that may have also brought the ship down. But there was a story there also, a real cursed jewelry. It wasn't a diamond, it was a necklace that was supposed to be cursed. Anyway, I'm going off track. But the movie, when they made the movie, they had some very weird stuff happening on the movie. It was absolutely, the whole set was absolutely beset with disasters all the way through the filming. There's a whole list of them, but some of the most important ones is where some of the I can't remember who it was. One of the lead women fainted, was taken out with a stretcher at exact sort of timing as in the show of the action events that were about to be portrayed. And it was just constant tragedies, one after another. That you can look them up; they're listed on the internet. But again, it sort of seems to indicate that there's an energy there. There's something not quite right with the whole scene, you know. Because as a psychic medium, I recognise that certain events can carry a sort of an energetic residue, perhaps we could call it. Sort of they influence the experiences associated with them. Sort of this immense tragedy, the loss of life connected with the Titanic, the energy it creates. It might have left an imprint, perhaps, that's resonating even to this day, and to the events that we see unfolding at this moment underneath the Atlantic as I speak. Don't forget to make a comment. Let's hear what you have to say. I think this is a fascinating story. What do you think? Is the Titanic cursed? Is there some strange weirdness with it? And do you know any extra stories that perhaps I've not mentioned about the Titanic and the strange coincidences and the mysteries associated with it? Well, if you enjoy my shows here and you enjoy reading my books and you enjoy my work generally, you might like to join me on Zoom, because perhaps you'd like to open your own psychic powers and discover and awaken your spiritual potential. So you can join me now on my transformative psychic workshops, which are on Zoom. Group sessions on Zoom. You will learn to meditate. You'll learn to develop your psychic skills. You'll learn to open your spiritual powers. And I'll share with you my knowledge of spiritualism, plus my knowledge from the East, from India, and the things I've learned over my years. And together, perhaps, we can navigate this troubled world together. We can share our feelings, our thoughts, our hopes, our ambitions with clarity and purpose. So you can join me. Click the link below. It's in the description of this video. Spaces are limited, of course, but join me to unlock your psychic and spiritual potential.